Good, thank you very much there, Rob. I'm going to continue on now and talk about the requirements, get specific in terms of what you'll be expected to do. So if you note in your handout where it says requirements of the project, okay, you're going to need to write a formal review of the literature. So what you'll need to do is to choose a topic and then read broadly, okay? Read broadly, reading literature that has to do with that topic. As you do that, as you read that literature, start to develop a position, start to develop a perspective about what you see out there regarding your topic. Okay? So for example, I'm going through this process right now. I'm reading about language policy implementation. So maybe one thing I might do is read broadly about language policy, but then start to focus on studies that have to do with implementation. And then as I read that, I then start to think, okay, what is my position? What is my stand on this particular literature? So that is the process that you're going to have to take. And it's something that can be a bit challenging at first, especially if you have a big, broad topic. But when you narrow it down, then you'll be able to really focus on issues that you think are important to address. You need to do this critically, okay? So while you're doing this, really look at the perspective from a critical standpoint. Don't just summarize what's out there. Summarize it and critique it. Think about any areas that might have been missed out with respect to what the authors are saying out there. Okay? Another thing you'll need to think about as well is making sure that you have enough evidence to support your assertions. This is why reading broadly is key. Okay? When you do this, you also have to consider organization. Okay? You can't cover everything, so you'll need to limit the amount of studies that you're going to critically look at. You are synthesizing the information. You're taking you're looking at it from a standpoint. You're looking at what's out there, and you're synthesizing that information, and then developing a perspective on it that you will argue for in your project. So it's challenging, but it's doable in the amount of time that we have. Organization is also important too. When you discuss this particular perspective, you need to choose what areas of literature you're going to cover. You can't go overboard. You can't cover everything. So you need to delimit it. How much can I actually cover? And organize it into logical units throughout your paper. That's going to be very important as well. Of course, the register should be formal. It should be academic. No slang, okay? No colloquialisms, okay? And another important point too, it's highly recommended that you have somebody read your paper. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. Last year, I was working with a student. And she was finishing up her MA project. And I told her a good thing to do is to find somebody who can read it and to give you critical feedback. She contacted 12 people. And none of them replied. None of them had the time to do it. So, part of what we'd like to do is to change that type of culture of thinking. We're all in this together. So what we want to do with the Writing Center is to build a sense of community. Because writing is a social activity. You need to refine your arguments, okay? You need to make sure that they're making sense, in which case it's good to talk to somebody about it. Right? So the more dialogue that you have with your peers, okay, the better you can really refine your focus and make sure that your argument is clear. So that's going to be very important. So please be open to helping out your peers by, swapping papers, reading them over, critiquing them, pointing out the good points, points that need improvement, that sort of thing. Bibliography, references. Okay, you're all familiar with APA format. Okay, so this is something that will need to be really paid close attention to. Now in my class, as well as in SLA, okay, you start to develop skills for that. Particularly in my class because, we really get down to the fine grains of where the dots should be, where the italics should be. Ask anybody who took the course, they'll tell you. Okay? So all of those details need to be very, very finely attended to in your project. Now, take a look in your handout, okay? Take a look in your handout at page 5. Page 4 and 5. That's just an example of how an introduction can be shaped. I'm just pointing that out to you now. We don't have to read it now. It's quite lexically dense. But it just gives you a sense of how you can shape your paper, okay, especially at the beginning. Make sure that you have a focus towards the end of the introduction. And then also, if you notice in the model, you give a roadmap as to what you're going to do in the paper, what you're going to discuss. Okay? So that could be an example of what you can do in your paper. If we turn the page, there we have an example of a model for a subsection. Now note, you have to read broadly, okay? Read broadly and connect ideas. So this is an example of how you can do that with reference to a variety of authors, and make sure that throughout that you are basically communicating a central point. That's going to be important too. Being able to divide your paper into logical subunits so that it's crystal clear as to what position, what perspectives you're talking about. Okay, so I hope that gives some initial ideas. Of course, doing that is going to be an ongoing process. It's going to take time to refine, develop, organize, shape your paper. But that gives you some ideas as to what the requirements are. So now Kazuko is going to take over and talk about assessment.